Thank you so much for clicking on my video. And if you're returning, welcome back to my channel. Tonight is the beginning of the end. We begin part one of three of our recap of Diana, her true story in her own words, written by Andrew Morton. Now, this is her biography, and in order to produce this amazing body of work, Andrew Morton spoke with Diana firsthand. He had recordings, and we've already recapped all of her narrated recordings of her account of these events, but also included in the actual book are accounts, firsthand accounts from Diana's friends and family with her blessing to share this information with Andrew Morton. It gives us a well-rounded view of what was going on at that time in Princess Diana's life from her perspective and from the perspective of those closest to her. Now, I'm trying my best to be as considerate as possible when speaking of these things because these are real people. These are not characters in a book or show or a movie. These are real people with real lives. Princess Diana was a real person, and despite her many amazing works and the way that she affected people, at her core, she was simply human. And so, speaking about these events can be really tough, knowing that these things happen to a real person and not a fairy tale princess and not some character from a show. This was a real person going through these things, and I ask, if you are listening to this, to please keep that at the forefront at all times. Diana did not deserve what happened to her. And recapping this book has helped me to see her in a new light. A lot of these stories I knew. Hearing these stories from her has been a very different experience. And then hearing these accounts from people closest to her at that time who had the freedom to speak with Andrew Morton with her blessing, it definitely gives a well-rounded view. It also continues to validate and reinforce my support of her youngest son, Prince Harry, his wife, Princess Meghan, and their children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, and the things that they have also experienced at the hands of the British monarchy and the British tabloid press. So I ask that, again, as we recount this, we approach this with kindness, consideration, and care about the real people and the real lives involved. While I don't have a heaven or a hell to put anyone in, I can certainly say this. Princess Diana did not deserve what happened to her, and I am so grateful for the fact that she was able to tell her story. We discussed in the prelude the many great lengths that Diana went through in order to share this. And so the least we can do is take her experience into account, especially with the current events. Let's get started, and thank you for listening. Once again, thank you so much for clicking on my video. If you have not already, feel free to go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on that notification bell. I'm going to pause, backtrack, and ask you, don't forget to like the video, hit that thumbs up button. It's right below the video. Hit the thumbs up button. Thank you, thank you. And I would love it if you could include yourself in the conversation by using either the live chat feature if you're watching this in the live premiere or the comment section if you are watching this on replay. So this is part one of three of our recap of Diana, her true story in her own words. Up until this point, we have been recapping the transcripts and the audio recordings that are narrated by someone else of Princess Diana telling her experience. And so now we get Andrew Morton's actual written work that we are recapping, and we're going to do this in three different parts. Since there are so many chapters, I have listened to a bulk and have separated the book into three sections that we will recap throughout the month of May. After we are done with the recap, I have something else pretty special regarding Princess Diana that I'm going to share in place of the Royal Review once we are done recapping this book. So, I know many of you know a lot of these stories. I myself did as well, but hearing them in this format is different. So I want to go ahead and provide a trigger warning because of the content that we will be discussing tonight in this recap. Just a reminder and a trigger warning, there will be discussions of eating disorders, mental illness, mental health, suicidal ideations, and suicide attempts. I do not want anyone to feel overwhelmed or bombarded. Princess Diana's early life in the royal family was very difficult for her, and while we are very thankful that she was able to share her story and give a raw and true account, it might not be suitable for all audiences, and it might be hard to listen to and digest if not prepared. So again, this is a trigger warning that we will be discussing part 1 of Diana, her true story in her own words, and that does include eating disorders, mental health, mental illness, as well as suicidal ideations and suicide attempts. If you have decided to continue listening, great. I will do my best to discuss these topics with as much candor and tact as possible. It's just the subject matter in and of itself can be triggering and uncomfortable, especially for someone that we all have come to know and love. But if you are suffering from anything in your own life, please reach out to the suicide hotline in your country. And I will be providing that information in the description box below if you need to talk to someone. So we're going to hop into the recap. Let's get started. So let's get started with recapping part 1. Now, part 1 is comprised of chapters 1 through 4. And in this section, we get far more detail about Diana's childhood and how, despite growing up in extreme privilege, she was no stranger to pain and turmoil. The divorce between her mother and father was so polarizing, so much so that it even culminated in a fight years later between herself and her stepmother, Rain. Now, it was polarizing to the point where everyone had a take on who was right and who was wrong. But everyone seemed to lack compassion when giving their opinion, and that is something that affected Diana greatly. We also get far more detail into the antics that the children played on Rain Spencer, their stepmother. Like, for instance, at a party, all of the kids getting together and daring Charles Spencer, the youngest child and the only boy, to push Rain into a swimming pool in the middle of a party. Thankfully, she recognized what was going on and was able to avert the occurrence. However, that was not unlike many of the other antics that they played on her. They really did make her work for inclusion into the family, but that doesn't make her innocent either. Part of the reason they treated her like this was because of how they treated her, how she treated them. I'll give you an example. So on Christmases, she would run Christmas like a drill sergeant. She completely redecorated their home, throwing out a lot of their mother's decorations and their mother's items, making it her own and essentially kind of crowding the space and not really leaving a lot of room for them. It's kind of a stepmother's way, right? Evil stepmother's way. However, she even ran Christmas like a drill sergeant, particularly present opening. She would tell them who had to go at what time, what present they could open. They had a time limit. She essentially had them on a time clock, completely ruining the spirit of Christmas for the kids. But one of the problems that she had was the fact that she was always hung up on how she was perceived as the evil stepmother. Years later, when the Earl Spencer fell ill from a stroke, Rain wouldn't let his children see him in the hospital. And it was then that she doubled down on not wanting to fuel perception that she was the evil stepmother. Mind you, being an evil stepmother. She felt like between herself and her husband, she would be able to help him recover by focusing, helping to manifest healing, and blocking him out from anything that might stress him, which she determined was his children. He wasn't told at the time, nor immediately after his recovery, that she wouldn't allow his children in. And so he just thought they weren't visiting him. He was in the hospital for nearly a year. So I want to play this clip from the book, from the audiobook, so that you can kind of get a little bit more of a glimpse into why their relationship with Rain Spencer was as tumultuous as it was.
The stable block was turned into a tea room and gift shop. Over the years, numerous paintings, antiques, and other objets d'art were sold and often, claimed the children, at rock-bottom prices, while they described in disdainful terms the way the house was restored. Earl Spencer always stoutly defended his wife's robust management of the estate and said, "The cost of restoration has been immense." However, there was no disguising the sour relations that existed during this period between Rain and his children. She publicly commented on the rift when she spoke to newspaper columnist Jean Rook. "I'm absolutely sick of the wicked stepmother lark. You're never going to make me sound like a human being because people like to think I'm Dracula's mother, but I did have a rotten time at the start, and it's only just getting better. Sarah resented me, even my place at the head of the table, and gave orders to the servants over my head. Jane didn't speak to me for 2 years, even if we bumped in a passageway. Diana was sweet, always did her own thing. In fact, Diana's indignation at Rain simmered for years until finally it boiled over in 1989 at the church rehearsal for her brother's wedding to Victoria Lockwood. Rain refused to speak to Diana's mother in church, even though they were seated together in the same pew. Diana vented all the grievances which had been welling up inside her for more than 10 years. As Diana challenged her, Rain replied, "You have no idea how much pain your mother put your father through." Diana, who later admitted that she had never felt such fury, rounded on her stepmother. Pain, Rain, that's one word you don't even know how to relate to. In my job and in my role, I see people suffer like you've never seen, and you call that pain? You've got a lot to learn.
Over the years, it's not discussed in this section, but it is later on, and we will get to that. But over the years, they did mend fences and they were able to come together and have a very solid relationship. It's worth noting that Princess Diana's mother faced a lot of scrutiny, mainly because of her depressive episodes. There have also been accounts that the Earl Spencer struck her physically and caused her great pain by being emotionally unavailable. And there have also been allegations, and I think at some point confirmations, that Princess Diana's mother did cheat on their father. So they had a tumultuous relationship on so many different levels. And at the helm of all of that were the children. And then after that whirlwind, and of course, this is essentially going on, and everyone in their aristocratic circle know what's going on and are weighing in and are not really being considerate of the children being within earshot. So they are in constant agony of hearing how people treat their mother and speak about their mother, but they are also in some ways being abandoned by their mother. So they're defending someone who is also hurting them greatly. They are defending their father, who is also contributing to their hurt in some ways. So this is just a toxic environment for everyone involved. And then, of course, you enter Rain Spencer, who, as his wife, is asserting her way and is starting this life with her new husband, but she is doing so by making some of the same mistakes that a lot of stepmothers made, which is, I'm not trying to integrate into an established family unit and carve out my own place. I'm trying to dominate and make everyone acquiesce to my will. And that is not the way to enter into an established family, nor is it a way to usher in the new person that you are integrating into your established family. Respect is needed on both sides. You can't come in and just sell off these children's mothers' things and think that they're going to be okay with you. It's also never appropriate to argue with a child about their perception of their other parent when you are not one of their parents. And I would even venture to say, even when you are one of their parents, some things have to be acknowledged on their own, and there should always be respect given to their other parent, no matter what you're discussing. You can say anything, but in a respectful tone. And Rain was way out of line. She deserved that what for that was given to her by Princess Diana. A great example of what I mean when I say speaking ill to a child about their other parent is never the way to go. And sometimes letting them see what they need to see in order to avoid more hurt is needed. If you've ever seen the movie Hope Floats, in the movie Hope Floats, a real quick sidebar, Sandra Bullock is portraying a mother who, she's a housewife, and she peaked in high school. So did her husband, and they ride off into the sunset. They have a child and they start their life together. And as she's so comfortable being this very rich housewife, she finds out that her husband is cheating on her. He tells her in a very public way, and it's with her best friend. When she moves back home to be with her mom, to kind of regroup and recover, her daughter is very resentful because she doesn't know the real details. Essentially, she knows what her dad did, but she's still rationalizing it because she's a child, and she in some way blames her mom. And so she's angry that her mom left her dad, and she misses her dad, and she essentially gives him the hero complex, like that whole view of like, my dad's a superhero, he would never do anything to harm me, he would never do anything to harm you, and please go back to my dad, and he's so great. And then when she sees the father, the little girl finally gets to say, like, can you take me with you? I miss you. And she's essentially been blaming her mom and being resentful towards her mom, but she doesn't really know how awful her father has been to her mother, nor is that her place to know. So when the little girl asks the dad to take her with him, he is now faced with having to break his daughter's heart himself. And you see this dynamic in the movie where you can tell the mom has always played the the mediator between the father and the daughter to protect the daughter's feelings. She doesn't really know how callous her dad really is. She's always been able to do the things to make it seem like the dad, put his name on a birthday gift, put his name on a birthday card, always, essentially micromanaged his relationship with their child. And so she has built up this image because her mom portrayed that. And so in this instance, because the mom understands that it's time for her to realize who her dad is so that she can adequately create appropriate expectations for him and avoid any further hurt, she has to let him break her heart. She does not save him from the embarrassment or save her daughter from having to have her heart broken. And it is a very tough scene in the movie where the little girl is begging, please take me with you. I miss you, please. And he's like, no. Now, get your hand off the car. And he honks the horn at her. Like, it is so grotesque. He speeds off and she is just in pain. Now, I can't remember the little actress's name, but she did an incredible job that every time I see that scene, I cry. But you see this moment where this little girl who is so confused about what's going on with the adults around her, you see this moment where her heart is just cracked open. And the mom is 10 times more in pain because she has to watch it. And she knows in this moment, if she protects her from this, it will inevitably be much worse down the line. And so she has to let her see it for herself. And he definitely delivers. And it's then that the daughter gets up to speed and she's able to properly assess the adults around her and adjust her expectations accordingly. And the reason I wanted to share that is because the situation with Rainn Wilson, that is the actor from The Office, no, Rainn Spencer, the issue with Rainn Spencer arguing with the Spencer children about how awful their mother was. First of all, you weren't there. You are getting feedback from someone who is the ex-spouse of the person that you're commenting on. Your commentary can go only as far as the spouse that you took, not their exes. You don't have any bearing over that relationship. It did not involve you, and to that effect, you should always keep your mouth shut. But then also, she's essentially trying to tell them about their mother. You are never going to convince a child that something is wrong with their parent, ever. They are going to have to see it. Nor should you ever want to tell them that something is wrong with their parent. Some things you have to make sure that they're protected from, but some things you do have to let them see in small increments so that they can adjust their expectations. But that has to happen on their own. It is nature for a child to fiercely defend their parent. And so Rainn was out of line. So regardless of how the children felt about their mother, they are entitled to those feelings. Rainn was not, nor was she entitled to imposing her feelings on them about their mom. That was way out of line. And the Earl Spencer, he fueled a lot of the rifts between them because he didn't manage the relationship. You know how I always say, if you're going to integrate new people into your family unit, you have to mediate on both sides. You have to provide a safe space for that person to integrate into, and you have to provide a safe space for your children to get to know this person and be realistic about how this person affects your children. You cannot just say, this is how it is and let it be, and expect a positive relationship. First of all, you're not being considerate of their fears, whatever their concerns are. You have to address them in a moderate place. You cannot do that from a place of you're going to deal with it, because they're not going to trust you after that. So their relationship did recover, but it was years into Diana's adulthood that relationship had to recover. And she also had things that were going on between her and her own mom as well, because her own mom suffered from, depression. And if I'm not mistaken, other mental illnesses that aren't really named in the book, but some of the symptoms are, they lead me to believe that they are aligned with a certain mental illness, but I won't say because they didn't say it in the book. But it's very common now to have conversations about those things, but it was not common back then. All of these conversations were very stigmatized when it came to mental illness and depression and mental health. So we then proceed in this section to talking about Diana's budding relationship with Prince Charles. Now, we went through that in the transcripts recap, so we don't have to go through all those details about Charles asking her to dance at a party. He was dating her sister at first, but it really didn't pan out. He also had multiple girlfriends. The same year that he took up with Diana very seriously, he was still very much dating other women at the same time, kind of back to back. And so Diana wasn't really sure if she would get the proposal, because it could have very well likely gone to someone else. And as she noted in the book, these other women were also more accomplished than her. She essentially saw herself as a high school dropout, not a lot of accommodations to her name, or commendations to her name, excuse me, and not a lot of real world experience. And when he did tell her, hey, I have something to ask you, he called her while he was away on vacation. And he was like, when I get back, I have something to ask you. That was the moment where she was like, oh, he might actually propose to me. Oh, okay. And that gave her time to really think about what she would have said. One of the things that Diana acknowledges that she was attracted to in Charles was that he was somewhat overworked and overlooked as a man. Now, this section of the book was quite interesting because we now know that Diana really nurtured her healing spirit, that healing quality that she had. She had a quality and a skill for connecting with people where they were, and essentially nurturing people in needs of in their times of need, and asserting herself in a place of contributing to their healing. That's really where she showed up for people. That was a need for her. That spoke to her spirit, and essentially that was her calling. It's something she was excellent at, and she definitely comforted people in times of need. Now, hear what I'm saying. As Diana got to know herself better and really came into her own as a woman, she realized that her place on this earth was to comfort people in times of need. She saw Charles as someone who was overlooked and was not respected well within his family unit. And she said he was overworked. He was constantly being pulled from engagement to dinner to activity, blah, blah, blah. And he expressed to her how difficult his life could be. Now, part of me feels like because of his age, he was in his 30s. Charles was 30. Diana was 19 when they took up. Actually, I think she was 19 when they took up and 20 when they got married. And at this time, hear me out, he is a very grown man. He has had more than enough time to come into his own. He has had more than enough time to learn how to manage his time, manage his engagements. He's had more than enough time to get used to working with the team and his staff. He is an accomplished man at this point. I personally feel like whether or not he felt comfortable enough to be vulnerable and shared with her how he felt overworked and underrespected, I personally feel like at all times he was very, very aware of Diana's need to help people in their times of need. He was very aware of Diana's empathetic nature. He was very aware of Diana's ability to connect with people, and I think he knew he could have her, and he could have her in his pocket if he were to express himself as a man who needed help, as a man who needed sympathy. He played to her strengths, which was, I'm going to be there for someone in their time of need. And I think he used that because the way they describe their conversations, the way that they describe his interest in her, and some of the things that he said to her in the beginning, it all points to, I figured out what it is that will get this girl. And he played that up because you immediately see that side of him switch off after he knows he has her. I think it was all part of the chase. And I don't put it past him, because if he were dating someone his age, they probably wouldn't have fallen for that sad chump type of character. But Diana did because she was a child. She was 19. She had a lot of growing to do, but she hadn't even gotten a chance to know herself. So she wasn't probably the best at discernment at that time. She was literally mentally no match for him. If she were being preyed upon, she wouldn't have been able to recognize that because of her age and because of the background she came from. And during their courtship, while her grandmother warned her that she and Charles were not a good fit, she told her right off the bat, it is not going to work out. His way of life is far too different than ours, and you will not fit in because of your nature. It is too rigid and regimented, and that it is a very soulless family, essentially. And she just outright said his lifestyle and his family will not suit you. But her flatmates and her friends encouraged her. And I think, again, Diana, knowing at this point, probably fanning the flames of her calling being be with people in times of need, my sympathy, I'm kind of heart-led. Like I said before, she is a very heart-led person, a lot like Prince Harry, a lot like Meghan, where if you need me, I'm there for you. Like care first, think later, maybe type of balance. And I think that kind of overwhelmed her of wanting to be there for him and him expressing the need to have her with him. But I wanted to put an end to this narrative that their marriage was arranged. That is a gray area, Princess Diana truly believed Charles was in love with her, and she said so multiple times throughout this book and in the transcripts. She was also in love with him. And that was not a figment of her imagination. He behaved as if he were in love with her. As she said, he behaved as if he were devoted to her. He wrote her very passionate letters. They had very passionate phone calls. Like, he expressed love to her in many, many different ways, oftentimes never outright saying it. As a matter of fact, every time Princess Diana would say, I love you, right before and right after their engagement, he consistently said whatever love means. He said that in the engagement video, but he said that to her multiple times prior to that video. But despite her nagging feeling that Camilla was always waiting in the wings, she still felt like that was essentially old news, because Charles told her, that is a friend of mine. She is married. I'm not interested in her. That is a friend. So she felt like the consideration and the attention that he paid to Camilla, and the attention that Camilla paid to him, was more so a really deep friendship, because Camilla was married. She had no reason to believe that they were taking up with each other behind her back. Also, I want to remind you, their engagement wasn't really, how can I say this? So, according to Diana, their engagement was not arranged as much as it was encouraged. The reason it was encouraged was because Diana checked off all the boxes, but Charles was actually essentially scouting the proper bride for years prior to meeting Diana. So it wasn't like his family was like, you're going to go meet Diana and marry her. It wasn't an arrangement in that way. But once he took up with Diana and was like, yes, I could actually marry this woman. This is actually someone that I can marry and meet your criteria. It's a compromise. Then they encouraged him, okay, you're 30, you need to get on it. So it was more so encouraged, but it was not an arrangement. And the reason I want to make that difference is because Diana did not go into this saying, okay, I have to marry the prince because it's my duty. No, she went into it and said, I will marry this prince despite his lifestyle, despite knowing in my heart of hearts, I don't ever want to be queen, but I want to be with him because I'm in love with him and he is in love with me. And we have to differentiate that, because I always see conversations where their marriage was arranged. He was really in love with Camilla. Camilla was married. Side note, she wasn't an option for him at the time that he got married to Diana. 2, he presented himself as if he were in love with Diana. Diana being 19, getting this attention from this very well-respected, well-to-do, and very powerful man, who is also in private showing lots and lots of love to her, showing lots of devotion to her, writing her passionate letters, having passionate phone calls. These things are convincing her that she is falling in love with him. Mind you, Diana was ill-experienced. She never had a boyfriend prior to Charles. So all of this is, imagine your first love and what a whirlwind that is. And, you know, most of us have that moment in high school or junior high where we're just like, our first crush, our first boyfriend, whatever. And it's just really strong because you just don't know any better. She's having this, first of all, delayed. She's at 19. So all of these feelings are very real for her. And he is playing to that. He is pretending, well, he might have actually been really in love with her. So he is showing and expressing love to her in a lot of different ways. He is telling her, Camilla is old news. I'm not interested in her. We're just really good friends. And she meets the criteria for his bride. And his family says, you need to get on with it. If you want to marry her, let's do it. So that was the extent of the royal family's involvement. It was not the fact that they were like, Diana's the one you need to marry. If that were the case, it wasn't in this book. And so we're just going to discuss it from the angle of this book. But as far as there being an arrangement, nope. She married the man that she loved and she thought was in love with her. And in some ways, as to his capacity, he did love her. He just wasn't in love with her. And he expressed that a couple of times. Let's hear a little bit of the segment from the book, from this section about Charles and Diana being in love and that engagement.
Besides her undoubted love for Prince Charles, her sense of duty and her deep desire to carry out a useful role in life were factors in her fateful decision.
So immediately after his proposal to her, he reminds her that one day she would be queen. And the reason this is important is because Diana was very nervous when he proposed to her, that she started laughing. Like, she has a nervous laugh, and I can understand that. And proposals can be intimidating and uncomfortable. It's just, you imagine what they're like and then they're not like that. So you can get really nervous. You can laugh. When my husband proposed, I said, thank you for the ring before I answered the question, because I'm really polite. And I saw the ring and I was like, oh my God, thank you. And I was like, oh, yes. So proposals can be difficult for that reason. And I think she was just overwhelmed. Again, we are talking about a 19-year-old girl. And so he reminds her, like, this is serious business. You're going to be queen one day. And she actually had a voice in her head right then that told her, not likely.
And then asked her simply to marry him. At first, she treated his request in a light-hearted way and broke into a fit of giggles. The prince was deadly serious, emphasizing the earnestness of his proposal by reminding her that one day she would be queen. While a small voice inside her head told her that she would never become queen, but would have a tough life, she found herself accepting his offer and telling him repeatedly how much she loved him. "Whatever love means," he replied.
Now, we talked about this in the transcripts narration recap, but I want to remind people that Diana did have moments of great perception that some would even say is clairvoyance. She predicted the illness of his horse when they showed no signs, and I think she even predicted the death. She predicted her father's illness as well as the outcome prior to her ever having knowledge that he was sick yet. She predicted his stroke like 2 or 3 days before in a room full of crowded people and predicted the outcome, and she was dead on. So Diana had moments of great perception, but also what seemed to be clairvoyance. And her grandmother also had been known to say things that alluded people to think that she was somewhat clairvoyant. And this isn't surprising that later in life, Diana got very comfortable with this side of her and being able to read people and read the room and just essentially read the vibes and accurately predict what would happen in the future. But she also relied heavily on astrologers and psychics later in her life, same as her grandmother. And she communicated with her grandmother through mediums at times. And so, fast forward, Prince Harry in Spare shares with us that there are multiple signs that his mother has expressed her presence to him after her death and has spoken to him through mediums. Wouldn't be shocked that, she obviously relied heavily on that type of support and he has seemed to follow suit. So I find that to be very interesting. While the engagement is announced amongst their family and friends in a private manner, not to the public, Diana realized that her sisters were having different reactions. While Sarah, her sister, was super happy for Diana, she was a bit jealous of her newfound fame. However, Jane was more so worried about how Diana would cope with the overwhelming fame. She worked at the palace and she knew what it could be like. No one could predict how massive Diana's fame was, but they did know that she would struggle with it emotionally, and Jane offered her a lot of support in that. After the proposal, Diana and her mother went on a trip to just get away and even start the preliminary process of wedding planning. And the entire time, she was gone for about 3 weeks, and the entire time, Charles never called her. And when she finally called his apartment at Buckingham Palace, he wasn't there. It was only when she called him that he returned her call later. He was essentially no contact.
As the days passed, Diana pined for her prince, and yet he never telephoned. She excused his silence as due to the pressure of his royal duties. Finally, she called him, only to find that he was not in his apartment at Buckingham Palace. It was only after she called him that he telephoned her.
And actually, it wasn't 3 weeks, it was 10 days. So I want to make that correction real quick. But as soon as Diana started living on palace grounds, it became painfully obvious to her friends and her family that she wasn't doing well. She almost immediately lost weight. And this is when her friends started noting that she cried often. Throughout all of this, from the very beginning, Camilla was always making sure her presence was known.
There was Prince Charles's clique of sycophantic friends, many of them middle-aged, who were too fawning and deferential. She instinctively felt that that kind of attention wasn't good for him. Then there was the ever-present Mrs. Parker Bowles, who seemed to know everything they were doing almost before they had done it. During their courtship, Diana had asked Charles about his previous girlfriends. He had told her candidly that they were married women because, in his words, they were safe. They had their husbands to think about. Yet Diana truly believed he was in love with her because of the devoted way he behaved in her presence. At the same time, she couldn't help but wonder about the fact that in the space of 12 months, he had been involved in 3 relationships: Anna Wallace, Amanda Knatchbull, and herself, any one of which could have ended in marriage. There was a letter lying on her bed. It was from Camilla Parker Bowles, and had been written several days before the engagement was officially announced. The friendly note invited her to lunch. It was during that meeting, arranged to coincide with Prince Charles's trip to Australia and New Zealand, that Diana became suspicious. Camilla kept asking if Diana was going to hunt when she moved to Highgrove. Nonplussed by such an odd question, Diana replied in the negative. The relief on Camilla's face was clear. Diana later realized that Camilla saw Charles's love of hunting as a conduit to maintaining her own relationship with him. It wasn't clear at the time, then again nothing was. Diana soon moved into rooms at Buckingham Palace where she, her mother, and a small team had to organize her wedding and her wardrobe.
So it's very clear that Camilla is plugged in from the very beginning. She knew about the engagement before it was made public. And it's very clear that Charles was sharing all of this information with her. Another part of that conversation that we heard from the transcripts is that she knew Charles's agenda and schedule for travel, something Diana didn't even know at this time. So it was very clear that Camilla was being treated with priority. And again, he is consistently invalidating Diana's fears by telling her, we're just really close friends. By the way, she's married. She's safe. I'm not going to have a problem with her. And little do we know is that, this is what she does. Camilla comes from a long line of hoes and, like Alice Kipple, and her husband was totally fine with her sleeping with Edward VII, King Edward VII, and he even helped her become the best side piece. So this is a team effort. And so Camilla just seems to have followed suit with, her family's calling. Now, Diana does not come from something like that. So she's ill prepared in a lot of ways, but not only in her relationship with Charles, but to be a royal in general. She was severely underprepared for the role, and this is something she acknowledges a lot. 30 some odd years later, we're still talking about how the royal family fails to prepare new brides to enter into the royal family. It's absolutely ridiculous. And despite the Queen appointing Lady Susan Hussey to get her up to speed, Diana still did not have full disclosure on everything. Lady Susan Hussey was mostly focused on the history of the royal family and making sure Diana understood the palace grounds and their historical reference, but not necessarily getting her up to speed when it comes to how to dress, how to sit, like the princess lessons that everyone seemed to expect them to have, which they should have some sort of onboarding procedure. Y'all got a whole bunch of staff and they're lazy. They're obviously not wanting to get up early. They're getting paid to do nothing, taking Prince Harry's parking spot, getting mad at Meghan for giving them a pizza and biscuits party and giving them extra goodies from designers. They're not doing anything but sitting around mooching off the royal family. They could have gotten Diana and Meghan up to speed, but that's neither here nor there. Interesting that Lady Susan Hussey's name comes up yet again with not preparing a royal bride, but we'll get there. At the end of the day, Camilla made it known that she was present from the very beginning. And this is why I all but laughed at those claims that Diana cheated first. It's impossible to cheat first when Camilla and Charles never ended before he married Diana. And that's why I got so angry about that claim, but also I laughed at it because I was like, no one can really believe this. And I realized people were actually believing it. So anyway, when Diana discovered the bracelet that Prince Charles had purchased for Camilla, she passed out in a fit of turmoil and threatened to call off the entire wedding. So Camilla's presence is consistently ramping up. The closer this wedding gets, the harder it seems that Charles and Camilla are determined to make things for Diana. And she's not the one who stood in the way of them. The Queen is the one who would not allow Charles and Camilla to marry in the beginning. And then Camilla goes off and gets married. So they're taking out their frustrations with the Queen and then also Camilla's husband onto Diana, who had the least involvement in their relationship, not being able to see it through. So I hate the way that they make it like Diana interrupted an existing relationship when in actuality, Charles manipulated Diana into marrying into a relationship and into a family that was not prepared for her presence. And he blamed her for that. Camilla blamed her for that. Instead of not being a dirty dog, he decided to take out his frustration with not being able to marry Camilla onto Diana and make her life a living hell. Anyway, and their whole network did it. So she confronted him about the bracelet, and he insisted on giving it to Camilla anyway. And so when he went off to his engagement with Camilla, like a little lunch that they had, he took the bracelet with him, letting Diana know that he was going to give that to Camilla. And she was completely in shambles. She invited her sisters over for lunch, and as she's talking to them, she's like, I want to call off this wedding. I don't want to marry him. Like, he's in a relationship with someone. And they basically told her, like, she was going to have to do her duty. Her name was already on, her face was already on the tea towels, and she had to go through with it. They literally told her, stiff upper lip and get on with it. That's really hard to hear. I'm sorry. That's just really tough. But again, everything moved so rapidly, and in all of this, Diana is being manipulated in so many different ways. So, and again, her family doesn't know the extent to which she's being manipulated. They assume things are as they seem as well. And to be fair, the royal family is really the culprit in all of this, but more so than anyone else is Charles. He is the most to blame in all of this. People can only do to Diana what he is allowing, and he is allowing the worst, the full gamut of manipulation and mistreatment. So now we get to the wedding. And despite his former health struggles, the Earl Spencer was enthused by the crowds, and he walks Diana down the aisle. Now, Diana understands that since his previous stroke, he's going to have trouble holding up his own weight and have trouble walking. And so her focus was on getting him down the aisle, curtsying to the Queen, and getting to Charles. The night before their wedding, Charles did tell her that he was not in love with her, which was heartbreaking. But then he sent her a note, and I cannot remember if it was with a gift. I'll have to look that up. But he did send her a note that said, tomorrow will be great. All you have to do is get down the aisle and get to me. And he essentially told her he couldn't wait to marry her. And so I think the way Diana perceived this was, he may not be in love with me now, but what we have will grow into that, because she was in love with him. And I think that's that optimism, that first of all, that youthful optimism, it is unbeatable. But then also the optimism that he is encouraging her to have. He is still like laying the breadcrumbs that find your way to me, and this is going to be something strong. Even throughout the vows, he knew that she was nervous, and so he kept like whispering encouraging things to her. She had every reason to believe he was actually the person that he presented himself to be. Again, she doesn't see him as this strong, capable man at all times. She sees him as this vulnerable, wounded man who's stuck in this matrix, and she wants to be there to help him out of it because she is in love with him. So her intentions were extremely noble, and he preyed upon that. That is just personally my feelings. So anyhow, when she walks into her wedding, she's focused on keeping her father up, holding him up. She is focused on getting to the Queen and curtsying to the Queen in this ginormous dress. It's got a 25-foot train. That is a lot of fabric. And she's also concerned with getting to Charles, only for her to look to her left and see the world's worst side chick wearing a very, very, very light gray suit and hat, pillbox hat. And of course, it appears white in the photos. So Camilla wore white to Diana's wedding, and she saw her in the crowd, and she curtsies the Queen, and she goes to her husband, or she goes straight to her husband, and then they curtsy the Queen. So anyhow, let's see a little footage from that wedding, shall we? Now, something interesting that I found out is, if you notice Diana and her father getting out of the chariot, what's something that you see first? You see Diana looking amazing. You see all the pomp and circumstance. You see her father looking happy and excited. You see all kinds of things. But if you look at her dress, something I have never noticed until I read this book is that her dress is wrinkled, massively wrinkled. For me to have seen this footage a million and one times and never noticed this, first of all, that's never been where my eye went. But in the book, Diana explains that the day of the wedding, her dressmakers realized that they did not account for the size of the chariot that she would be riding to the wedding in. And so they did not consider that when they were making this ginormous dress. And so she said they had to essentially cram the dress into the chariot with her. She said it was extremely uncomfortable. Mind you, it's got a 25-foot train and a massive veil. She's wearing a tiara, the Spencer tiara. She is extremely uncomfortable. And they are in this tiny space with her and her dad crammed in all this fabric. And so she said when she got out of the chariot, her dress was extremely wrinkled because of what happened. And the drive or the ride in the chariot was actually quite long. And so I thought that was just such an interesting little point because I'd never noticed before. And then after she mentioned it, or after it was mentioned in the book, I was just like, oh my God, the dress is wrinkled. Thankfully, no one, I don't think anybody's ever even mentioned it. I've never noticed it. So it didn't matter, but I just thought it was funny. And let me correct the order. After watching the footage again, I got the order wrong. So she was concerned with carrying her father up the aisle or just like holding up his weight, getting to Charles. That's when she spots out of the corner of her eye that heffa huzzy, picket fence mouth, Camilla Parker Bowles, who's got her son standing on a chair at a royal wedding. And then after that, after of course they go out, they sign the marriage certificate and the decree, and then they come back in, or it's the marriage license, and they walk back in, and that is when she is tasked with curtsying to the queen, and she is extremely nervous. She said she thought about it all night long. That was the one thing that she was terrified of. Is one, the curtsy has to be perfect because now she's in the family. This is the first curtsy as her daughter-in-law. And then two, she's wearing this massive gown. And keep in mind, she is again wearing a tiara. So she wants to make sure that the tiara is consistently upright and looks right. And she's presenting well and everything is perfect. The curtsy is perfect. It's beautiful. The queen is very pleased. You can see it on her face. And she could tell how nervous Diana was. That is something Diana mentions a couple of times in the transcripts, is how kind the queen actually was to her. And how when they were in private, they had really great conversations. And I thought that was interesting because we know that she has a very fractured relationship with both her mother and her stepmother. So for her to be able to speak very comfortably with the queen, that says a lot. We often see the queen as reserved, but people who've met her often say how funny she is and how kind and gentle and warm she is, and how she's always being a grandmother, how she's always concerned. She's always trying to make sure that you're comfortable. And in private, she can be a very different person than what we can assume she was. Now, something I will say is this. Watching the wedding, is it just me or did the queen seem to hate the song God Save the Queen? She may have just been over it at that point. But as they stop and they have to sing God Save the Queen at the wedding, she just looks like, oh my God, I'm so over this. Could y'all please find a new tune? Can we do a remix? Like, what can we do? But you know what? One of the documentaries I watched, and oh, I wish I could cite it because it was years ago. One of the documentaries I watched said that Princess Elizabeth, who later became Queen Elizabeth, was never quite comfortable with God Save the Queen because every time she heard it, she was reminded that her father had passed. In her mind, it should be God Save the King because of her dad. And I just thought that was so sweet. Like that bond between a father and a daughter is just so strong. And so I just thought that was really sweet. And in this video, though, it doesn't look like that's what she's thinking. It looks like she's just like, okay, every time, I mean, I can't go nowhere without y'all getting on my damn nerves. And so let's get into Princess Diana's life after the wedding.
Their honeymoon gave no respite. In fact, it became much worse as Diana would make herself sick 4, sometimes 5 times a day. The ever-present shadow cast by Camilla merely served to throw fuel on the flames. Reminders were everywhere. On one occasion, they were comparing engagements in their respective diaries when 2 photographs of Camilla fell out from the pages of Charles's diary. Amid the tears and the angry words, she pleaded with him to be honest about how he felt about her and Camilla. Those words fell on deaf ears.
So after the wedding and into the honeymoon, we have talked about the transcripts, how Prince Charles was just essentially distracted the whole time. He was reading his novels the whole time, and he tasked Diana with reading them. And then at meal times, their alone time, they would go over what they'd read. And that was his idea of fun on the honeymoon. And then dinner time was a formal dinner. And so he would invite like different members of the crew, like the upper ranking members of the crew, to join them for dinner. So they never had any alone time on the honeymoon. And so all of this stress and the signs that Camilla was there, which the cufflinks that Camilla gave him, he wore to his dinner when they were comparing their agendas to try to, match up dates when they would be traveling and stuff, so they could try to be together as much as they could. He dropped a few pictures of Camilla out of his agenda book. And every time that she would have a reaction, a very understandable emotional reaction, she was in great pain, knowing like, even after the wedding, you're still pining after this woman. What the hell is going on? He just was so dismissive. Like, she's a friend. You need to get over it. Like, he dismissed her so much. He definitely gaslit her. It was just a mess. So the honeymoon is terrible. Her bulimia is becoming, more fervent in her life, and she's very stressed by this. And so she spent most of her time in the kitchen or in the galley talking to the crew. And so finally, when they get back, she realizes that after the wedding, well, this is her assumption, after the wedding, that things would calm down, that the excitement about her entering the royal family was more so about the wedding. And she just assumed that it was like wedding fever for a royal wedding. People have been waiting for Charles to get married for a long time. So she's really excited for things to just calm down, and for the demand for her presence and just like the overwhelming like engagement from people would kind of die down, and the tabloids would stop following her. These are her assumptions. But the opposite happened. Her fame continued to grow, and it baffled her profoundly. She had hoped again that it would calm down after the wedding was over, but then she realized it wasn't about the wedding, it was about her. That took her a lot of time to reckon with. She felt she was no longer seen as a human, but more so as a position. Even the constant curtsying and the being called ma'am and your royal highness was way too much for her. She even realized that Charles was still seeing Camilla and consulting Camilla about his marriage to Diana. He violated her on so many levels. Despite all of this, though, Diana and Charles still had short stretches where they would fall back into what we could see as kind of like a love bubble, where it would appear that Camilla was old news, that she wasn't in the picture or what have you. And he would just be so devoted in these short spurts of time to Diana. Like, their passionate calls returned. He would start writing her passionate letters, reciting poetry to her. He would go back to being her dream guy, and then it would just be over. This is all part of that manipulation that I mentioned before, that I don't see him as a victim. I see him as more calculated and manipulative. I feel like he doesn't have the ability to emotionally connect with her, so he's performative to make sure that he still has her wrapped up so that she can accomplish the things he needs her to accomplish, aka have 2 children. And then once that's over, that's when you stop seeing these short spurts of passion from him. And that's why I think that they were always calculated, or moments in time where Camilla was more so engaged with Andrew Parker Bowles and was kind of cutting Charles off, and then Charles would then respond by getting into his marriage again. It felt like everything that he was doing with Diana was a knee-jerk reaction to how his relationship with Camilla was going. And that is how I read that. I could be wrong, but based on what she shared with how he would have these short spurts of just highly passionate engagement, and that's of course how they produced William and Harry, they would have these moments where he was highly passionate and he was wooing his wife. We also now know that he was being advised to get his marriage together. It was becoming a problem on a political level because Diana, of course, was in great pain. Everyone in the royal family could see it. And even though they were dismissing her in her face, they were still counteracting that with Charles by saying, you need to have your marriage under control. You need to take care of your wife. And he was responding to that with these highly passionate short spurts for a couple of weeks, couple of months at a time. And it was essentially keeping Diana hooked into the toxic cycle. And I think that was more so just to produce babies. Honestly, it was more so to please mommy and produce babies. Now, like I said, these short spurts were always interrupted by a couple of things: Camilla and traveling for engagements, or his polo. So when they were having really strong on moments, they would end abruptly, and then he would take back up with Camilla, or it was because of polo or because he had to go to an engagement. Now, we do know a royal pilot that flew a helicopter for the royal family did go on record a couple of months ago saying he often would fly, or a private plane, would often fly Camilla to see Charles on engagements where there was travel when he was married to Diana. So she was catching a PJ to be with him. Diana never stood a chance in that marriage. By this point, though, like well into their newlywed phase, she was no longer able to lean on her family anymore because they had attended the wedding. They knew that this was in stone. There was no getting out of it. They essentially told her to just get on with it in the same way that the royals were telling her, but they were doing so in a place of kindness, where the royals were doing so in a place of, oh my God, this again. It was a problem. So feeling stalemated from all sides. I mean, look at this as a pyramid. Diana's right in the middle, and you look at this as a triangle. At the head of the triangle is Charles. Her well-being is solely based on her marriage to this man who is dismissing her. This isn't a normal marriage. Whereas you can have all your eggs in one basket as a husband, but again, there's still resources outside of him if that marriage is not going well. You can go to church, you can go to a counselor, you can go to your family. But because their marriage was political, people were less apt to hear her out and more so to just tell her, go back to your husband and deal with this. Be an adult and deal with this. So you've got Charles at the head of this. Then on the left, you have the royal family. And then on the right, you have her family. And she's dead center. And they're all saying the same thing: put up with it and shut up about it. She breaks. And this is when she starts having S word ideations. I'm going to say the word once, but when I say S word, I mean suicidal. I don't want to keep saying that on this channel. It's just very hard to hear. But this is when she's having S word ideations. She saw several doctors and therapists, but they always recommended medicating her, and she did not want to be medicated. And it's then in the midst of all this that she realizes she is pregnant. And she saw William coming into her life, that pregnancy, as a saving grace because it validated her choice in not being medicated. Because it is assumed that because her brother that was born right before her, that passed away after 10 days, because he passed away and he suffered from deformities, it is assumed that Diana rejected taking medication for her mental illness and for her eating disorder because she did not want to interrupt the pregnancy in any way and cause any harm to her fetus, because she was worried that it would the same thing that happened to her brother would happen to her son. So they weren't able to force medication on her, and because they had been trying. Now, hear what I say. They were trying to force her to medicate herself. And she said it was overwhelming. I'm sure that didn't help with the stress. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure that did not help the anxiety at all. But let's hear a little bit more about that.
Diana was then 3 months pregnant with Prince William and felt absolutely wretched. Her relationship with Prince Charles was rapidly unraveling. The prince seemed incapable of understanding or wishing to comprehend the turmoil in Diana's life. She was suffering dreadfully from morning sickness. She was haunted by Camilla Parker Bowles, and she was desperately trying to accommodate herself to a new position and new family. As she later told friends, "One minute I was a nobody, the next minute I was Princess of Wales, mother, media toy, member of this family, and it was just too much for one person to handle." She had pleaded, cajoled, and quarreled violently as she tried to win the prince's assistance. She now threatened to take her own life. He accused her of crying wolf and prepared to go riding on the Sandringham estate. She was as good as her word. Standing on top of the wooden staircase, she hurled herself to the ground, landing in a heap at the bottom. The Queen was one of the first to arrive on the scene. She was horrified.
As we know, Diana and Prince William survived that fall down the stairs. The Queen made sure she got medical attention, and Diana's gynecologist flew out to check on her and the baby, and she recovered. And even after this attempt, Prince Charles went riding. That's really tough. I can understand not knowing how to respond, but to simply not respond is unfathomable, and I can't believe that there was very little compassion given. There's only so far "mommy didn't hug me" that I'll let you go to explain some of this stuff. Like, your mom not hugging you, your mom not picking you up, your mom not showing affection shouldn't stop you from responding to someone who is in dire straits to the point that they are willing to self-harm. Like, to have no response is unfathomable. I do understand the freeze reaction or trauma response. I understand that, but I still can't fathom having such a callousness that you would just walk out. where your wife and unborn child are at the foot of the stairs. His legacy will never be positive. His behavior will always haunt him, as it should. She obviously survived and recovered. And despite the turmoil that was going on behind the scenes, Diana still soared on royal engagements. People loved her. She was stellar and she captivated crowds immediately as a newlywed. After shining very brightly, she never once received a word of praise from her husband or her new family. The stress continued to culminate. The pregnancy was consistently hard. She struggled with morning sickness and, of course, just pregnancy symptoms in general. She still had bulimia. She was still, as she put it, a media token, and she was still being emotionally stonewalled by all the most important points in her life: her husband, her royal family, and her personal family. There were several more S-word attempts that she took on. This next part might be a little tough. It's only about 10 seconds, but I just wanted you to hear it as it was presented in the book.
In the first years of their married life, Diana made several suicide bids and numerous threats. It should be emphasized that they were not serious attempts to take her life, but cries for help. On one occasion, she threw herself against a glass display cabinet at Kensington Palace, while on another, she slashed at her wrists with a razor blade. Another time, she cut herself with the serrated edge of a lemon slicer. On yet another occasion, during a heated argument with Prince Charles, she picked up a penknife lying on his dressing table and cut her chest and thighs. Although she was bleeding, her husband studiously scorned her.
So if you are about to ask that same question that I had, the answer is yes, 100%. While she was bleeding, he was scolding her rather than helping or being compassionate towards her. Obviously, she survived these attempts, and despite the way that it's narrated or written by Andrew Morton, that these were not serious attempts, I would say that type of thinking is exactly why she went through the turmoil that she did go through. Any attempt on your life is serious and dangerous and could be successful. And no matter how you perceive it, you should always render immediate care and comfort. So throughout her pregnancy, she started to bond with Charles's polo manager, Major Ronald Ferguson, his daughter, Sarah Ferguson. They began to bond and they struck up a very fast friendship. The end of this chapter, it ends chapter 4 with the birth of Harry. And at this point, Princess Diana and Sarah Ferguson are really good friends. And now she finds an ally within her new world. And they, again, after the birth of William, there's just this pop of positivity, like, yay, new life. And it gives Diana new focus and it gives her life new meaning. And now she has something to focus on, and she has in some way found a calling, like, okay, this is why I'm here, to take care of this baby. He needs me. I have to push through. And it gives her some new motivation. But the postpartum from that sends her back into a spiral. As she's essentially coming out of that and getting more footing in the royal family and finding her way as a woman, these are some formative adulthood years. These are her 20s, and she's in the royal family. And this experience, she's getting better at the job. She's getting better at pushing through, but it's not, the surroundings and the effects that these things were having on her are not changing. But at least she has friends now. So she's meeting friends and she's really finding her footing and getting more comfortable with being in the spotlight. So again, they have another passionate spurt, and he's doting on her again. He's giving her attention. He's validating her and affirming her, and things are going great. And the tours are going, quote, great, and things are working out, and they produce Harry. The same thing happens again. He essentially goes cold. That pregnancy, he is not emotionally available to her. He's not validating her. It's, again, like I said, I feel like it was calculated. Once she gives birth to Harry, we've talked about this before with these recaps from her transcripts, but Once she gives birth to Harry, which is the end of chapter 4, Charles actually says to her, "It's a boy, and he has red hair." He insulted his own son the first moment he met him. He started their relationship in a negative light. First of all, Charles wanted a girl, and he made it known that he was disappointed that Harry was a boy. And then, secondly, he has red hair, something he inherited from the Spencers, from Diana. He let it be known that he was disappointed. And he also made the joke, "I have an heir and a spare, my work is done." After that, there are no more hot, heavy, passionate, in love bubble spurts. And I bet you can guess why. Because, like he said, his job was done. Imagine being married to Princess Diana and seeing that as a chore. I can't imagine that either. He's a special kind of stupid. Diana said the comments that he made about Prince Harry, she told friends that that moment, something inside her died. And it was a moment that marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. She knew that it would not last after that. I find something to be interesting. I keep finding all these like connect the dot moments between Diana and Harry by dissecting this book. When Diana was born, her parents were extremely disappointed that she wasn't a boy. So much so that they didn't even name her for like 10 days. When Harry was born, his father was disappointed that he wasn't a girl. So they bonded in that. I think Diana understood how that would affect Harry, having a parent who was essentially disappointed by your presence. That isn't easy. That's got to be tough. I mean, you can grow to love the child. Obviously, Charles grew to love his son, but he certainly didn't grow to show it. So, this section of the book is probably going to be the hardest section as far as covering their marriage. We have two more sections to cover. And I'm glad we got through it because this is where like the S word attempts are happening. This is where the bulk of the manipulation is happening. This is where you see the innocence dying in a young woman with so much optimism and all these opportunities at her feet. And he stole her youth. He treated her like a baby farm. And it's really sad to hear that. And also he and his whore are sitting on the throne. So it's even worse when you hear it at this point in history. But it's important to keep these things current, these conversations current, and never forget what those two people, those wicked people, are capable of. Now, I did want to end this with some information real quick. We talked about S word, which is self-harm, suicidal ideations, etc. And I just wanted to end this with this information real quick. Just give me a little moment of your time. I didn't like the way Andrew Morton described Diana's S-word attempts as not being that serious and never intentionally trying to kill herself, just cry for help. I want to remind people two things can be true, and whether or not we deem someone's attempt on their life or their behavior of self-harm as something serious according to our own standards, whatever they are going through that would lead them to do anything that in any way would harm themselves, and they are knowingly doing this thing, that should be given the utmost attention, compassion, and importance. We have to respond to things, and we have to take action when things like this happen. We cannot freeze. We cannot stop for a moment and be like, what? We cannot go into our own head. We have to stay present in the moment because someone's life could depend on it. At the very least, if you don't know how to respond, show compassion. He essentially scolded her. He was a monster. Intentional or not, the outcome is still the same. He was a monster and he greatly aided in her pain. It is not uncommon for people who are considering self-harm to keep it close to the vest. By the time they open up and share, the choice is likely already made and you have less time to react. So it's important to keep an eye on people before they open up and say that they're feeling feelings of self-harm so that we can be alert and be ready to respond and provide as much help as we can. So I wanted to share some signs with you of people who might be considering self-harm. Now, any one of these signs could be present for a number of reasons: stress, lack of sleep, depression, whatever. So not all of these signs immediately mean that they are considering self-harm or suicide, but the majority of these signs operating in tandem or showing themselves in tandem could mean something's wrong or about to happen. So if you were ever not even sure, you can always just ask someone, is everything going okay? If you ever need to talk, I'm here. If you ever need me, I'm here. So I wanted to share a few of those signs so I have from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention some tips, and then also some do's and don'ts from Colorado State University regarding how to respond when someone is in distress. So here's some of the signs before we get to the tips. If you notice someone has a change in eating and sleeping habits, withdrawal from friends and family, pulling away from once enjoyed activities, explosive episodes, impulsive and risk taking behaviors, drug and alcohol use, poor personal hygiene, changes in personality, difficulty concentrating, a decline in academic work or a decline in productivity at work, or physical symptoms minus an illness like stomach aches, headaches, fatigue, etc., they might be at risk of being in great emotional distress or at risk of potentially causing self harm. And so I want to go over some tips from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention on how to respond. So here are just some of the tips. Again, as soon as you can, get them to a professional. Help them get to a professional. Here's some ways that you can help encourage them to do that. When they talk to you, let them know you're listening. Reassure them that you hear what they're saying and that you're taking them seriously. Do not invalidate. I have heard people respond to this type of thing when someone has said they were having suicidal ideations. I have heard people respond to them. I say, oh, y'all act like you got it so bad. When my day, I had it harder than you. This person got it harder than you. And that drove them over the edge and they made an attempt on their life. And that same person later asked, what can I do in situations like this? How do I help them? I don't know why they did this. And I was sitting there like, I know exactly what pushed them over the edge, but I didn't share that. I just directed them to a professional. An example of letting them know you're listening and not dismissing them is, quote, I'm so glad you're telling me about how much has been going on and how you're feeling. Thank you for sharing this with me. I definitely want to help in the ways that I can. Also, show your support in your own way. Make sure that they know you're there with them and that you care. Some of this can be said, or this can be said in some of these ways. I'm right here with you. Nothing you're going through changes how I feel about you and how awesome I think you are. I love you no matter what, and we're going to get through this together. That goes a lot further than challenging the person or calling their bluff. I once heard someone respond to a suicidal ideation with, that's the coward's way out. They later made an attempt. When someone confides in you that they are considering self-harm, another response could be encouraging them to keep talking and truly listen. Just letting them know they're heard. Let them know you want to hear more about how they're feeling, not just what happened, but how they're actually feeling, them as a person and what they're going through. And listen actively by expressing curiosity and interest in the details. Don't turn the conversation back to you or someone you know who went through the same thing. Engage with them about them. And some of the responses you can have handy are, wow, that situation sounds really difficult. Or how did that make you feel when that happened? And that's it. Another response you can give is asking them about changes in their life and how they're coping. So if you know someone is going through something and you're really not sure how to respond, you can just ask, how are you coping with that? You can also express interest in finding out how long the person has been feeling the way that they're expressing and any changes that could have caused this. How long have you felt this way? And when did these feelings start? Have these thoughts led to any specific changes in your life, like trouble sleeping or keeping up work? But you can essentially engage them about this information. Those are just my first recommendations. The full article on this is linked in the description box below at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. It's a website, so even if you are in the UK, you can also access this as well. And just real quick, 5 tips for what to do and what not to do when someone expresses being in distress. And this is from Colorado State University, and I just thought this list was great. What to do: if you feel you can't ask the person to seek help, take steps yourself to alert the proper people. This is the most important step. So if you do nothing else, make sure this person either seeks help or that you have alerted someone who can actually help them, whether that's a parent, a guardian, a teacher, a therapist, or a hospital. Tell the person you are worried about Tell the person that you are worried about that you do not want them to die. And you have to say that expressively. I don't want you to leave. I want you to be here. Say, I am here for you. And if you believe that a person is at immediate risk of hurting themselves, then call 911 immediately. Number 3, point them to resources. So I always recommend Psychology Today. I always bring it up because Psychology Today not only provides a lot of information, but you can literally find a therapist and book straight through Psychology Today. And you can use filters like filtering out your insurance, filtering out their gender, their race, their location, whatever criteria matters most to you, you can use that to filter and find the right therapist for you. 4, tell someone. Follow up with your university or whoever else, whatever organization brought you two together, and make sure you close the loop with resources if you are concerned about someone. And then number 5, act on your instincts. If they said they're fine and they don't seem fine, I would trust my gut and just keep monitoring and providing aid if I can. And then also be wary of the immediate turnaround in mood. That can be a signal that all is not well. What not to do is what I want to leave you with. Don't say, I know how you feel, because you don't. And that can be seen as a rationalization and essentially dismissive. You don't want to do that. Don't say, get over it, because that is dismissive. It's very rude. It's a stonewall, and it's very uncaring and can make the person feel even worse. Don't say, there was a tornado in Arkansas. Be thankful for what you have and realize other people have it worse than you. That is top 2, one of the worst things you could ever say to someone, because essentially you're dismissing and minimizing what they're going through. What they're going through matters to them, so much so that their life might be not as important as the pain that they're experiencing. And so what you never want to do is challenge someone to validate someone else over themselves. And you definitely don't want to let them know that you are uncaring. And I'm pretty sure if that is your first inclination of response, you might be a contributor to how they're feeling. 4, don't ignore warning signs. And number 5, don't keep it a secret. I can understand there's stigmas around people confiding in us that they are suffering from any type of mental health issues or any type of ideations. There's a stigma. People often are embarrassed that people see them this way, or people will treat them differently. Treat them as if they are valuable and important, but don't coddle them. Be in their corner, but maintain their dignity. You never want to make somebody feel minimized. And you don't want to keep it a secret in the attempt to not embarrass them. You don't want to keep it a secret because that could literally cost them their life. Now, this list is again in the sources section of the description box below. I just want to remind people, whether you are in the United States or in Great Britain, or to say Great Britain, I'm sorry, or in Britain, you can dial 988 if you are ever needing suicide prevention. The suicide prevention hotline in the US and in Britain is 988. You can text 988 or you can call 988 and you will get some support to help you. Even if you just have to have a conversation, even if the thought just crosses your mind and you're like, where did that come from? Call 988. It's kind of like when Megan said in her interview, the thought was very clear and it surprised her and it scared her. And that is often how ideations will show up. It's just like a conscious thought, like, well, if you took this route, this could solve this or XYZ. And it can be very scary. And I just want to make people know that you are not crazy and nothing is wrong with you if you have that feeling, but you do need to get help for that feeling, because you should not have to live with that. And you should be able to come out on the other side and get the proper support that's there for you. Now, because we've talked about such heavy stuff, I want to end it on not a light note, but a note where Diana took her power back. And so I'm going to be sharing a video before we get out of here. But before I share that video, I want to say thank you so much for watching. If you have not already, please don't forget to go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel. Feel free to share these resources in the sources section in the description box below with anyone who you feel like might need them, or feel free to publicize them anywhere. Anytime we talk about topics like these, I always want to remind people that help is there, it's available and immediate. And if you need anything and you don't feel like you have anyone in your corner, there is someone there trained and happy to help you. Please, before you make any decisions that could affect your life or anyone else's, tap into the resources available for you. People want to help. People are in your corner, and you do not deserve to suffer alone. Someone is there for you. Now that we've got through the heavy stuff, let's watch this video. After the video, of course, we'll be ending the video. So I want to say thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to like the video, and let's take a look at this moment where Diana took her power back. Thanks for watching, you guys.
I walk into the house and stick my hand out to Camilla for the first time. I think phew, got over that. We were all upstairs and I was chatting away, and I suddenly noticed that there was no Camilla, no Charles upstairs. So this disturbs me. So I make my way to go downstairs again. I know what I'm going to confront myself with. Try and stop me from going downstairs. Then I don't go down there. I'm just going to find my husband. I go downstairs, and there's a very happy little threesome going on downstairs. Camilla, Charles, and some other man who I didn't know, chatting away. So I thought, right, this is your moment. So I went and sat down, joined in the conversation as though we were best friends. And I said, Camilla, I'd love to have a word with you if possible. And she looked really uncomfortable, put her head down. She said, oh yes, right. And I said to the two men, okay boys, we'll just have a quick word with Camilla, and I'll be up in a minute. And they shot upstairs like chickens with no heads. And I could feel upstairs all hell breaking loose. What is she going to do? So I said, Camilla, would you like to sit down? So we sat down, and I was terrified of her. And I said, Camilla, I'd just like you to know that I know exactly what's going on. And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, I know what's going on between you and Charles, and I just want you to know that. And she said to me, very interesting, she said to me, you've got everything you've ever wanted. All the men in the world fall in love with you. You've got two beautiful children, what more would you want? And I didn't believe what she said anyway. So I said, I want my husband. And she said, well, and she looked down the whole time. I said to Camilla, I'm sorry I'm in the way. I obviously am in the way. And it must be hell for both of you. But I didn't know what's going on, don't you know? In the car on the way back, my husband was over me like a bad rash. I cried like I've never cried before. It was anger. It was 7 years of pent-up anger coming out. Cried. I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning I woke up and I felt different. Tremendous shift. I'd done something, said what I felt. Still the old jealousy and anger swirling around, but it wasn't so deathly as it's been before. And I said to him at the weekend, 3 days later, I said, oh darling, I'm sure you want to know what I said to Camilla. There's no secret, you may ask her. I just said I loved you, and there's nothing wrong in that.